The continued story of Taran, the assistant pigkeeper. I'm glad you've stayed to listen. Now sit round as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 5. The Oath. Where is Elenwy? Taran cried as King Rudlum and Queen Teleria stared at him in astonishment. Where is Mag? He's made off with her. Sire, I beg you, turn out your guard. Help me find them. Elenwy is in danger of her life. What? Queen Teleria clucked. Mag, the princess? You're overwrought, young man. Perhaps the sea air, don't shake so and wave your arms about, has gone to your head. Because someone isn't here for breakfast doesn't mean they're in danger. Does it, my dear? She asked, turning to the king.
I should hardly think so, my dear,
Answered Rudlum.
this is a heavy charge to bring against a loyal retainer,
He added, looking gravely at Taran.
Why do you accuse him?
For a moment, Taran stood, perplexed and torn. Gwydion had bound him to secrecy, but now that Mag had struck, must the secret still be kept? Taking his decision, he let the words tumble from his lips, hurriedly and often confusedly telling all that had happened since the companions had reached Dinas Ridnant. Queen Teleria shook her head. This shoemaker disguised as Prince Gwydion, or was it the other way around? And ships and torch signals to enchantresses make the wildest tale I've heard, young man.
Wild indeed, said King Rudlum, but we shall learn the truth soon enough. Fetch the shoemaker, and we shall soon see if he is the Prince of Dawn.
Prince Gwydion seeks Akron, Taran cried. I have given you the truth. If it is not so, you shall take my life for it. Will you prove my words? Fetch your chief steward. King Rudlum frowned.
It is odd that Mag should not be here, he admitted. Very well, Taran of Caerdalban. He shall be found, and you shall repeat your tale in his presence.
He clapped his hands and ordered a servitor to summon the chief steward. Frantic with anxiety, knowing that time was fleeting and delay could cost Elenwy's life, Taran was nearly beside himself when the servitor at last returned with tidings that Mag appeared to be nowhere in the castle. Nor could Elenwy be found. As King Rudlum hesitated, still puzzled by Taran's words, Gurgi, Caw, and Fluter entered the great hall. Taran raced to them.
Mag, that villainous spider!
The bard exclaimed as soon as Taran told him what had happened.
Great Belan, she's ridden off with him. I saw them galloping through the gate. I called to her, but she didn't hear me. She seemed cheerful enough. I had no idea anything was amiss, but they're gone, long gone by now.
Queen Teleria turned deathly pale. The ladies of the court gasped fearfully. King Rudlum sprang to his feet.
You have spoken the truth, Taran of Caerdalban.
Shouting for the guard, the king strode from the great hall. The companions hastened after him. At King Rudlum's hurried orders, the stables were flung open. Within moments the courtyard filled with warriors and neighing horses. Prince Run, meantime, had strolled into the courtyard, where he peered at the gathering host.
Hello, hello, he called to Taran. Is this a hunting party? Splendid thought. I should enjoy a brisk morning ride.
A hunt for your traitor steward, Taran retorted, thrusting Run aside, and making his way to King Rudlum. Sire, where is your war leader? Give us leave to put ourselves at his service.
My war leader, sorry to say, is none other than Mag himself, the king answered. As we've never had a war on Mona, we never needed a war leader, and it seemed quite in order to give Mag the honorary title. I shall form up the searching party myself. As for you, yes, by all means, help with any tasks that need doing.
While King Rudlum saw to the ordering of the warriors, Taran and the companions labored with all speed, tightening saddle girths and handing out weapons from the armory. Prince Run, Taran saw, had clambered astride a sway-backed piebald mare that persisted in turning in circles despite the efforts of the prince to control her. Fluter and Gurgi had led out 3 horses. A glance at the animals filled Taran with despair, for they seemed unspirited, of no great mettle, and he wished for the swift-footed Melonlass now grazing peacefully at Caerdalban. King Rudlum, taking Taran by the arm, drew him hurriedly into an empty stable.
You and I must speak together, the king said quickly. The warriors are ready and divided into 2 parties. One I shall lead over the lands south of the river Allar. You and your companions are to ride with my son, who shall command the search in the hills of Paris, north of the Allar. It is of him I would speak.
Prince Run in command, Taran burst out.
What then, Taran of Caerdalban?
King Rudlum asked sharply.
Do you question Prince Run's skill?
Skill! Taran cried. He has none. Eleni's life hangs in the balance. Our task must be done without delay. Give command to a feckless fool? He can barely knot a sandal lace, let alone ride a horse or wield a sword. The voyage to Mona showed me more than enough. Choose one of your liegemen, a warrior, a forester, anyone save Run. He stopped short. Dolben has my oath to protect Eleni, and I say what is in my heart. Were I to say less, I would fail my duty. If I am to suffer for my words, then so be it.
Once again you speak the truth, King Redlam answered. It is not you who suffers for it, but I.
He put a hand on Taran's shoulder.
Think you I do not know my own son? You are right in your judgment, but I know too that Run must grow to be both a man and a king. You carry the burden of an oath to Dolben. I pray you take the burden of another one. Word of your deeds has reached Mona, King Redlam went on, and I have seen for myself that you are a brave lad and honorable. I confide this knowledge to you. My master of horse is a skilful tracker, and in truth shall direct the search. Prince Run commands in name only, for the warriors expect leadership from the royal house. I would entrust my son to you and beg you to not let harm befall him, nor, added the king, smiling sadly, to let him make too great a fool of himself. Much he has to learn, and much perhaps he may learn from you. One day he must be king of Mona, and it is my hope that he will rule honorably and wisely with Elenwe, his queen.
Elenwe, Taran cried. With Run her husband.
Yes,
answered King Redlam.
When the princess comes of age, it is our desire they shall wed.
Princess Elenwe, Taran murmured, confused. Does she know of this?
Not yet, nor does my son, said King Redlam. Eleni must have time to grow used to Mona and our ways here, but I am sure it can all be happily arranged. After all, she is a princess, and Run is of royal blood.
Taran bowed his head. The grief in his heart kept him from speaking.
What say you, Taran of Caradolban? King Redlam asked. Will you give me your word?
From the courtyard, Taran could hear the clamor of warriors and the voice of Fflewddur calling his name. Yet these sounds reached his ears as though from a great distance. He remained silent, his eyes downcast.
In this I do not speak as liege lord to liege man, King Redlam added. I speak as a father who loves his son.
He paused, watching Taran closely. At last, Taran met the king's eyes. I will swear this oath, he said slowly. Your son will come to no harm if it lies in my power to keep him from it. Taran put a hand to his sword. I pledge my life to do so.
Go with my thanks, Taran of Caradolban, King Redlam said, and help us bring the Princess Elenwe safely home.
The bard and Gurgi were already mounted when Taran hurried from the stable. Heavy-hearted, he swung into the saddle. Ka flew to join him. Prince Run, who had finally managed to keep his steed from turning in circles, was shouting commands, unheeded as usual. As the searching parties galloped out of the gates, Taran lifted Ka from his shoulder. Can you find her? Seek her carefully, my friend, he murmured, while the crow cocked his head and looked at Taran with shrewd eyes. Taran flung his arm upward. Ka launched himself into the air and sped aloft. Wings beating, the crows circled overhead, drove higher against the sky, then disappeared from sight.
Yes, yes, shouted Gurgi, waving his arms. Go with flyings and spyings. Lead us to evil, wicked steward.
Yes, the sooner the better, cried Fflewddur. I can't wait to get my hands on that sneering spider. He shall know the fury of a flam!
Glancing behind him, Taran saw King Redlam's band stream from the castle and turn eastward. Ahead, the master of horse led his party of warriors toward the higher ground above Dinas Ridnant, and signaled for the outriders to search for tracks. Taran's face was set and grim as he rode silently next to Fflewddur.
Have no fear, the bard assured him. We shall bring Elenwe back with us safe and sound before nightfall, and all of us shall sing merry over this adventure.
We shall bring Elenwe back with us safe and sound before nightfall, and all of us shall make merry over this adventure. I promise you a new song in celebration. You would do well to make it a chant of betrothal, Taran said bitterly, and sing of the wedding of the Prince of Moda.
Run,
cried the startled Fflewddur.
To be wed? I had no idea. That's one disadvantage of being lodged in the stables instead of the castle. You miss the news and gossip. Prince Run indeed. Who is to be his bride?
Painfully, Taran told the bard of King Rudlam's plans, and of his own oath to keep Run from harm.
"Oh-ho," said Fluter when Taran had finished. "So that's the way the wind blows. Strange," he added with a quick glance at Taran.
I had always hoped that if Elenwy were betrothed to anyone, it would be— Yes, well, what I mean to say is that despite all the squabbling and bickering between the two of you, I had rather expected—
"Do not mock me,"
Taran burst out, reddening. Elenwy is a princess of the house of Llyr. You know my station as well as I. Such a hope has never been in my mind. It is only fitting for Elenwy to be betrothed to one of her own rank. Angrily he drew away from the bard and galloped ahead. So you say, murmured Fluter, hurrying after him. Look closer into your heart. You may find your opinion to be somewhat different. Taran, unhearing, pressed his steed to join the line of warriors. Turning northward, along the lower slopes of the hills of Paris, the searching party broke into smaller bands, each quartering its own ground. The warriors, widely separated, moved in long, wavering lines, often out of each other's sight, painstakingly scouting every possible hiding place. Yet, as the morning wore away and the noontide passed, they found no trace of the chief steward or Elenwy. Among the green and gentle slopes ran broken, pebbly trails, where the fleeing Mag might have passed, and where clues would be invisible to the eyes of even the most able tracker. Taran's heart sank. In his mind chafed the fear that he was following a false hope, and that Elenwy had been taken in an altogether different direction. From time to time he anxiously scanned the sky for a glimpse of Ka returning with news of the princess. Gwydion, Taran knew, was the only one who might discover Akron's plan. Mag was the key, but the chief steward had acted so swiftly that perhaps even now he was beyond the reach of the searching party. Taran redoubled his efforts to find a broken twig, a loose stone, anything that might bring them closer to Elenwy before nightfall put an end to the day's searching. Gurgi, riding close at hand, called out to him.
Look, look! Noble prince goes far alone, too far into the woods. He will lose himself. Then cheerful hellos will turn to sad moanings and groanings.
Taran, who had dismounted to study what seemed a possible trail, raised his eyes in time to see Prince Run galloping over the shoulder of a hill. He shouted at him, but Run was too distant to hear, or, more likely, Taran thought, was simply paying no heed. He leaped astride his horse and sought to overtake the prince. Until now he had managed to keep Prince Run always in view, but by the time Taran reached the hill, Run had vanished into the shadows of an elder grove. Below, on the rapidly darkening meadow, Fluter had cantered into sight and was calling him. Taran shouted Run's name once again, then beckoned for the bard and Gurgi to join him.
"That sickening spider has escaped us today,"
Fluter cried angrily, while his nag labored to the crest. But we shall fetch him out tomorrow, and Elenwy will be safe and sound. If I know the princess, Mag has already begun to regret stealing her away. She's worth a dozen warriors, even if she's tied hand and foot. Despite the bard's brave words, his face looked deeply worried. Come, said Fluter. The master of horse is calling in the warriors. We're to make camp with them for the night. Even as the bard spoke, Taran heard the faint sounds of a signal horn. He frowned. I dare not leave Prince Run to wander alone in the forest. In that case, replied Fluter, glancing toward the setting sun, we had best get a hold of him without delay. A flam is keen-eyed, but I'd rather not go stumbling about the countryside after dark, if it can be possibly avoided.
Hasten, yes, yes, with hurryings and scurryings, cried Gurgi. Fearsome shadows fall, and bold but cautious Gurgi does not know what hurtful things hide in them.
The companions rode quickly into the grove, where, Taran felt certain they would find the prince. However, once beyond the ring of elders, and seeing nothing of him, Taran's alarm grew. Vainly he called the prince's name, only the echo returned. He cannot have ridden far, he told the bard. Even Run would have wits enough to halt at nightfall. Darkness covered the grove. The horses, more used to their quiet stalls in Dynasrid than to the forests of Mona, trode fearfully, rearing and shying at every wind-stirred brush.
The companions were obliged to dismount and make their way on foot, leading the reluctant steeds. By this time Taran was deeply troubled. What had begun as a simple matter had turned grave. "He might have fallen from his horse," Taran said. "Even now he may be lying hurt, or unconscious." "Then I suggest we find our way back to the rest of the band," said Fluter, "and ask them to help us. In this gloom the more eyes the better." "We would lose too much time," Taran answered, pressing on through the brush. Gurgey followed, whimpering softly to himself. The rising ground told Taran they were moving above the foothills. No sound came but the hiss of saplings that whipped back as he passed and the click of horses' hoofs over pale stones. Taran stopped short, his heart in his mouth. From a corner of his eye he glimpsed a fleeting movement. It lasted but an instant, a shadow within a shadow. Fighting down his fear, he groped ahead. The horses had turned more skittish than before, and Taran's mount laid back his ears and voiced a frightened whinny. Gurgey, too, had sensed the dark presence. The terrified creature's hair rose along his neck, and he began to howl pitifully. "Wicked, evil things come to follow harmless Gurgey. O kind master, save Gurgey's poor tender head from hurtful dangers." Taran drew his sword, and the companions, with many backward glances into the darkness, hurried on. This time the horses did not lag, but plunged desperately ahead, nearly dragging the bard with them. "Great Belin!" protested Fluter, who had crashed into a tree and struggled to free his jangling harp from a bush. "Hold up there! Next thing you know we'll be looking for our own steeds as well as Prince Run." With difficulty Taran managed to calm the animals, who now refused to budge. Despite all his coaxing, pleading, and tugging, the horses stood stiff-legged and round-eyed, their flanks trembling. Taran himself, exhausted, sank to the ground. "Our search is blind and useless," he said. "You are right," he went on, turning to Fluter. "We should have gone back. The time I had hoped to save is wasted twice over, and Elonie's danger is greater with every moment we delay. Now Prince Run is lost, and so is Caw, for all we know." "I'm afraid you're right," said Fluter. "And unless you or Gurgey knows where we are, I rather suspect we're lost too." Chapter 6. The Potions of Glue. At these words Gurgey set up a wail and rocked back and forth, clutching his head. Taran swallowed his own despair as best he could, and tried to reassure the frightened creature. "We can do nothing now but wait for dawn," Taran said. "The Master of Horse cannot be too far away. Find him as soon as you can. Above all, do not delay the search for Elonie. I shall seek out Prince Run," he added bitterly. "I have given my oath to keep him from harm, and I cannot do otherwise. But when I find him, I'll rejoin you somehow." He was silent then, his head bowed. Fluter was watching him. "Do not wear out your heart with grief," the bard said quietly. "Mag can't escape us for long. I don't believe he means to harm Elonie, only to bring her to Akron, and we shall catch him long before he can do that. Rest now. Gurgey and I will share the watch." Too weary to protest, Taran stretched out on the ground and covered himself with his cloak. No sooner did his eyes close than the fears of Akron came to torment him. In rage and vengeance, the haughty queen would slay any of the companions who fell into her hands. And Elonie? He dared not let himself imagine her in Akron's grasp. When at last he dropped into fitful slumber, it was as though he slept beneath a millstone. The sun had barely risen when he opened his eyes, with a start. Fluter was shaking him. The bard's yellow hair stood out raggedly in all directions. His face was pale with fatigue, but he grinned broadly. "Good news!" he cried. "Gurgey and I have done some seekings and peekings of our own. We're not as badly lost as you might think. The truth of it is, we've been threshing around in a circle. Look for yourself." Taran sprang to his feet and followed the bard to a low ridge. "You're right. There's the alder grove. It must be. And there, I remember the fallen tree where I lost sight of Run. Come," he added, "we shall ride that far together. Then you must go ahead and catch up with the rest of the band." Hastily the companions mounted and urged their steeds toward the grove. Before they reached it, Taran's horse drew up sharply, then bore suddenly to the left. A loud whinny rose from the cover of trees along the shoulder of a hill. In astonishment, Taran slackened the reins and let the horse canter freely toward the sound. In another few moments he glimpsed a pale shape beyond the foliage. As the steed carried him closer, he recognized Run's piebald mare. "See there!" he called to Fluter. "Run can't be far. We must have gone by him during the night." Reining up, he leaped from the saddle. His heart sank. The horse stood riderless. At the sight of the other steeds, she raised her head, shook her mane, and whickered anxiously. Fearing the worst, Taran hurried past the mare, while Fluter and Gurgey dismounted and raced after him. He stopped short. Before him, in a clearing, stood something that looked at first like a huge straw beehive. Fluter, by then, had come up beside him. Taran raised a hand in warning, and moved cautiously toward the strange hut. The conical, thatched roof he now saw had fallen away in many places. Rough stones, piled one on top of the other, formed a low side wall, a corner of which had collapsed into a heap of rubble. There were no windows, and the single heavy door hung askew from sagging leather hinges. He stepped closer. The holes in the thatch stared at him like empty eyes. Fluter glanced about him. "I'm not too fond of going up and rapping on the door," he whispered, "and asking whoever's inside whether they've happened to see the Prince of Mona. Somehow it seems like the kind of place even Run would rather avoid. But I suppose there's no other way to find out." Just then the door was flung open from the inside. Gurgey, with a yell, sought safety by scrambling up a tree. Taran's hand went to his sword. "Hello, hello!" Prince Run, beaming, stood in the doorway. Aside from looking a little sleepy, he appeared quite himself and altogether unharmed. "I hope you've got some breakfast with you," he added, rubbing his hands eagerly. "I'm nearly starved to death. Have you ever noticed how the fresh air sharpens one's appetite? Most surprising." Come in," Run went on, while Taran stared speechless at him. "You'd be amazed how comfortable it is. Surprisingly snug and cozy. Where did the rest of you pass the night? I hope you slept as well as I did. You can't imagine—" Taran could control himself no longer. "What have you done?" he burst out. "Why did you leave the searching party? Count yourself lucky that getting lost was the worst that happened to you." Prince Run blinked and looked puzzled. "Leave the searching party?" he asked. "Why, I didn't actually leave it, not on purpose, you understand. It happened when I fell off my horse, and had to go chasing after her all over nowhere, until I found her near this hut. By then it was getting dark, so I went to sleep. That's only common sense, wouldn't you say? I mean, why sleep outdoors when you can put a roof over your head? As far as being lost goes," Run went on, "it seems to me you're the ones who got lost. Wherever I go, that's where the search is, if you see what I mean. After all, I'm the one who's in command." "Yes, you command," Taran flung back angrily, "as you were born to, as a king's son." He stopped abruptly. Another instant and he would have cried aloud his promise to King Rudlum, and his oath to protect this witless prince. Taran clenched his teeth. "Prince Run," he said coldly, "you need not remind us we are under your orders, but for your own safety I urge you to stay close to us." "And I advise you to stay away from strange huts," put in Fluter. "Last time I was in one I almost got changed into a toad." The bard shook his head. "Shun them. Huts, that is," he added. "You never know what disagreeable thing you'll run into, and by the time you find out, it's way too late." "Changed into a toad?" cried Run, not the least dismayed. "I say, that might be interesting. I should like to try it one day, but there's nothing like that to worry about. No one lives here, and they haven't for a long time." "Hurry, then," Taran said, resolving never again to let Prince Run out of his sight. "We must join the others. We'll have long, hard riding before we catch up to them." "Immediately," said Run, who was wearing nothing but his shirt. "I shall get my things together." Gurgey, meanwhile, had clambered down from the tree. His curiosity getting the better of his prudence, he loped across the clearing and thrust his head into the doorway, at last venturing inside with Run. Fluter and the impatient Taran followed him. It was, Taran saw, as the prince had told them. A heavy layer of dust covered the wooden tables and benches. A spider had spun an enormous web in one corner, but even the web was deserted. On a broken hearthstone lay the charred remnants of a long-dead fire. Near the hearth, a number of large cook-pots, dry and empty now, had been overturned. Earthen bowls and tall jars shattered into fragments were strewn about the floor. Through the holes in the roof the leaves of more than one autumn had fallen, nearly burying a stool whose legs had broken into splinters. The hut was silent. The noises of the forest did not enter. Taran stood uneasily while Prince Run fumbled with his gear. Gurgi, fascinated by so many strange odds and ends, lost no time in poking through them. Suddenly he cried out in surprise. "Look, look!" he called, holding up a sheaf of tattered parchment. Taran knelt beside Gurgi and examined the ragged bundle. The field mice, he realized, had discovered the packet long before. Many of the sheets had been gnawed away, others were rain-sodden and blotted. The few undamaged pages were covered with cramped writing. Only at the bottom of the pile did Taran find pages in good repair. These had been carefully bound in leather to make a small tome, and their surface was clear and unmarked. Prince Run, who still had not got around to buckling on his sword, came to peer over Taran's shoulder. "I say," he cried, "what have you there? I can't guess what it is, but it looks interesting. And isn't that a handsome little book? I shouldn't mind having it to put down things. I'm supposed to remember to do." "Prince Run," Taran said, handing the undamaged volume to the Prince of Mona, who thrust it into his jacket. "Believe me, if there's anything that might ever help you do anything, you're welcome to it." He went back to puzzling over the parchment. "Between the mice and the weather," he went on, "there's not much to make out of this scrawl. There seems to be no beginning or ending, but as far as I can tell, these are recipes for potions." "Potions?" cried Fluter. "Great Beelin, that's something we've little use for." Taran, nevertheless, continued to scan and sort the pages. "Wait, I think I've found the name of whoever wrote them. Glue, it looks like. And the potions, as he says here, are to—" His voice faltered, and he turned anxiously to Fluter. "To make yourself grow bigger. What can this mean?" "How's that?" asked the bard. "Bigger? Are you sure you haven't read it wrong?" He took the pages from Taran's hand and examined them carefully himself. When he had finished, he gave a low whistle. "In my wanderings," said Fluter, "I have managed to learn a number of things, not least of which is don't meddle. I fear that's exactly what this fellow Glue did. Indeed, what he sought was a potion to make himself bigger and stronger. If those are Glue's boots over there," he added, pointing to the corner, "he surely needed one, for he must have been a little fellow." Half hidden by leaves, a pair of well-worn boots lay on their side. They were hardly large enough to fit a child, and seemed to Taran pitiful in their smallness and emptiness. "He must have been painstaking," Fluter went on. "I'll say that much for him. He describes everything he did, and set down all his recipes quite carefully and methodically. As for his ingredients—" The bard said, making a sour face, "I should rather not think about them." "I say," Prince Run eagerly interrupted, "perhaps we should try them ourselves. It would be interesting to see what happens." "No, no!" Gurgi shouted. "Gurgi wants no tastings of nasty lotions and potions." "Nor do I," said Fluter, and neither did Glue for the matter of that. He had no wish to drink his own concoctions until he had some hope they'd work, for which I can't blame him in the least. He went about it very cleverly. "As I gather from what he's written down here," continued the bard, "he went out and trapped a mountain cat, a small one, I should think, since Glue himself was such a small person. He brought her back, put her in a cage, and fed her his potions as fast as he could cook them up." "Poor creature," said Taran. "Indeed," agreed the bard. "I shouldn't have liked to be in her place. Yet he must have grown fond enough of her to give her a name. Here, he's written it down. Lion. Apart from feeding her these dreadful messes, I expect he didn't treat her badly. She might even have been company for him, living alone as he did." "At last it happened," Fluter went on. "You can see it by his writing how excited Glue must have been. Lion began to grow. Glue mentions he was obliged to make a new cage for her, and still another. How pleased he must have been. I can easily imagine the little fellow chuckling and brewing away for all he was worth." Fluter turned to the last page. "And so it ends," he said. "Where the mice have eaten the parchment, they've done away with Glue's last recipe. As for Glue and Lion, they've vanished along with it." Taran was silent, looking at the empty boots and overturned cookpots. "Glue certainly is gone," he said thoughtfully, "but I have a feeling he didn't go far." "How's that?" asked the bard. "Oh, I take your meaning," he said, shuddering. "Yes, it does look rather, shall I say, sudden. As I see Glue, he was a neat and orderly sort. He would hardly go off leaving his hut as it is now, without his boots at that. Poor little fellow," he sighed. "It only proves the dangers of meddling. For all his pains, Glue must have gotten himself gobbled up. And if you ask me, the wisest thing for us is to leave immediately." Taran nodded and rose to his feet. As he did, terrified whinnyings and the sound of galloping hoofs filled the air. "The horses!" he cried, racing to the door. Before he could reach it, the door burst from its hinges. Taran clutched at his sword and stumbled back into the hut as a huge shape leaped at him. This concludes Chapter 6. Thank you for listening, and remember, have a good day. You deserve it.